First of all, I want to thank you all very much for the invitation to present to your club, and I will present for about 15 minutes and then take questions. So here we go. First of all, wonderful news. Rotary has had 6 focus areas for quite some time, and you can see the 6 listed there. And now we have a new 7th one. And they started out with supporting the environment, but they've actually changed it now to protecting our environment. And one might ask, why did they do that? And the reason is that all of our good work in the other 6 areas are put at risk from a changing climate. And so now by unanimous vote, the RI board and trustees have adopted a 7th focus area, protecting the environment, which authorizes Rotary clubs everywhere to roll up their sleeves and go to work on protecting our environment, including working on climate change. But I want to back up just a little bit and say, how important is this really? I suspect that all of you are well aware that the climate is changing and it's a serious issue, but I think this is one of the really good testimonies to our situation. In November 2018, 2 years ago, the 4th National Climate Assessment came out from 13 federal agencies, including Defense, Commerce, and Energy, and 10 others. And the macro conclusion is climate change is happening now. It's caused mainly by CO2 emissions from burning fossil fuels. It's basically irreversible and it's serious. And if we need to act now to protect current and future generations. And then from, I would say, a fairly conservative US Chamber of Commerce, they have a position statement on climate, which includes inaction is not an option. And they call on policymakers to seize on approaches that will meet the challenges of the issue. And just this month, on the 19th, the president of the Chamber's Global Energy Institute said that the organization supports a market-based approach to accelerate greenhouse gas emission reductions across the US. So let's just very quickly review the basics. I think everybody is familiar with the greenhouse effect. The greenhouse gases capture outgoing infrared radiation and reflect a lot of it back to the earth. And this is a very good thing because without it, we would just be a frozen rock. So greenhouse gases are good. But like so many things, if you get too much of a good thing, then it can turn negative. And as we have a thicker and thicker layer of greenhouse gases, we capture more outgoing heat, more is reflected back, and the lower atmosphere starts warming like it has not done in the past. And atmospheric CO2 has been being monitored very carefully since about 1958 on a mountaintop in Hawaii. And you can see here just the steady rise of increasing accumulation of CO2 in the Earth's atmosphere, now up to about 417 parts per million, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that's a 50% increase over the normal past averages. And that extra CO2 is capturing extra heat. And here you see temperature graphs of global average temperatures going back to 1880. And whether you follow the blue trend line or the red trend line, you'd have to immediately say, well, those are trend lines we dare not stay on. We have to take some action to change this trend line. And 2020 was just reported to have tied 2016 for the hottest year ever recorded. And that extra heat's melting the ice pretty much everywhere except in the very heart of the Antarctica. even on the coast of the Antarctic, there's tremendous melting going on in the southern hemisphere summer. And the most recent estimates are somewhere between 1.5 to 4 feet of additional sea level rise in the next 80 years. And for context, it's important to understand that in the previous 150 years, sea levels only went up 8 inches. And we've built major cities right on the coasts all over the planet, assuming that sea levels would be fairly stable as they have been in the past. But now, because of the extra warmth and the melting of glaciers and ice caps, sea levels are rising rapidly. And just a 2-foot rise will be disastrous for many coastal cities. Norfolk, Virginia, and Miami Beach already have blue sky flooding, even on a beautiful day, no storm, no wind, but a king tide, and seawater bubbles up the storm sewers and floods the streets with salt water. And this is already beginning to impact property values in some of those lower lying communities. So the climate impacts are already happening. I think a lot of you remember the 4.5 feet of rain that Houston got a number of years ago, and that was a new all-time record for one rainfall in the lower 48. Blue sky flooding increasing on the coast, more powerful hurricanes, with those in 2020 setting new records, increased drought and forest fires. Every year for the last 5 years, California has reported yet its next biggest fire season ever, with 2020 being its biggest ever. And you in Oregon have had fires that are unusual. There's been fires in Siberia north of the Arctic Circle. And I think all of you are familiar with the fact that Australia has just had terrible fires. And this is because a warmer climate is drying things out. And yet in other places, there's torrential rains and floods. Insurance rates are rising, and our military tells us that climate change is increasing instability in the world because of these changes. So scientists predict that if CO2 and temperatures keep rising, there will be increasingly negative impacts on people pretty much everywhere. There will literally be no place to hide. Some of you might remember that back in April of 2019, this was the cover of the Rotarian magazine. And I think it's indicative of a new trend within Rotary to pay attention to this critical issue. And like so many other things, Rotarians don't avoid the tough issues. We roll up our sleeves and tackle them. If you go to Rotary International's website, under Our Causes, you'll now find protecting the environment as one of the 7 focus areas. And this is a screenshot of what you'll see there. Lots of good information. And I just want to share with you a moment about what's involved in the new focus area, protecting our environment. There's 8 key points in the statement of purpose and goals. And I'll let you read these for yourselves, but summarizing: protecting land and coastal areas, enhancing the capacity of communities to increase conservation, supporting sustainable agriculture and aquaculture, and then addressing the causes of climate change and climate disruption, and supporting solutions which reduce emissions of greenhouse gases, like was mentioned by the US Chamber of Commerce in that previous piece, and strengthening the resilience of ecosystems and communities affected by the same. And then supporting education to promote understanding of these challenges and taking action on them, advocating sustainable consumption, and addressing environmental justice issues. So these are the key parts of our new focus area as Rotarians. Back to the climate front. So the macro summary is CO2, it's rising CO2 and other greenhouse gases that are causing the warming. The warming is causing the climate to change in many different ways. It's us and our burning of fossil fuels that are fueling the problem. And it's really urgent because due to the size of the ocean heat sink and the length of lifetime of CO2 that's in the atmosphere, the new temperatures at which we eventually level off will be kind of a new permanent for hundreds and perhaps 1,000 years. So it's far better, obviously, to not go there, but to take action now to avoid things getting even warmer and having worse impacts. Our world and our children's world is at risk, and there are real solutions waiting to be implemented. And we Rotarians now with the new area of focus are encouraged to take action on climate change. And so the question is, what can we do? What will we do for future generations? And that's all kind of sobering. Is there any good news? And there's lots of good news. Almost all the countries in the world are now once again part of the Paris Climate Accord, acknowledging the problem and working on it. Many fossil fuel companies, especially the big European oil companies like Shell and Total, agreed that something like a carbon fee and dividend would be a good solution. And they're taking action to diversify. New wind and solar are growing like gangbusters. And Xcel Energy, which is a national leader among utilities in the country, has committed to a carbon-free electricity, 80% by 2030, which is only 10 years away, and 100% carbon-free electricity by 2050. And they happen to be my energy company in Northfield, and I've read a lot about them and statements by the company, and they say, why are we doing this? Because we need to do it for our children, but also because it's good business. Solar and wind are cheap now, and they're actually going to be able to pass along cost savings to their customers by going renewable. China and India are actually the first and the third largest emitters, are rapidly deploying wind and solar and committing to significant decreases in their emissions. But it's good to remember that the USA is still the biggest per capita emitter of CO2 by far. And then as of 2015, more people are employed in just solar than in coal, and wind and solar technicians are two of the fastest growing, good paying jobs in the country. But there's a lot more to do. So Rotarians, what can we do? And there's a lot that we can do to preserve all of our good work in the world. We don't ignore problems, we go after them. Rotary's got global reach and credibility. When you look at what we've done for polio, it's amazing. And it would be wonderful if Rotary tackled with similar resolve the climate change challenges. And my slide is not, there we go. So working to stop the humanitarian crisis caused by climate change will probably now help more people going forward than almost anything Rotary can do, along with our wonderful effort with polio. And one of the other beauties is that as Rotary clubs around the country and in some cases around the world are kind of aging, working as a club on climate action will resonate with the next generation of younger Rotarians. So what are some of the things that we can specifically do? One of the things that I would like to strongly encourage your club to do is to start a Rotary climate action team in your club. In our club, we started with just 3 people, and in very short order, we had 18, including bank presidents and college vice presidents and medical doctors. And we have a wonderful team. You could also join Rotary International's Environmental Sustainability Action Group, and there's the website. And consider, as you do your club's local and global grant projects, to have an eye towards those that will also be sure to positively impact the environment. And then I think today, in advance of the meeting, Marcia sent you all my handout that I normally happily deliver by hand when I give these talks. And there's action ideas also on that. And then learn about and support something like a revenue neutral carbon fee and dividend, which is now recommended by conservative economists as one of the fastest way to use market forces to reduce CO2 emissions. And actually, this is an idea that's gaining traction with a lot of conservatives and also with the US Chamber of Commerce. And let me tell you a little bit about how a revenue neutral carbon fee and dividend works. There's a fee placed on gas, oil, and coal as it comes into a port or out of the ground. And that money is collected by the Treasury, and minus a small administration fee, it's returned completely to US households. And this is actually essential because those increased prices of fossil fuel things are passed along to households and the products. So heating, cooling, transportation all become more expensive. And that rebate to households is what makes this work, because the lower 70% of all American households come out either whole or slightly ahead financially on this program. Well, how does that do anything? As fossil fuel-based products become more expensive, non-fossil fuel products become cheaper by comparison. So you have market forces that can drive this forward. And once electric cars are cheaper to operate than gas cars, even people who may be skeptical about climate change will just buy an electric car for economic reasons. So it moves our entire economy forward towards electrifying the whole economy with non-fossil fuel uses. And that all sounds maybe too good to be true. Are there any examples? And the good news is that there is a great example. Just north of us, British Columbia, Canada, has been doing this program since 2008, 12 years. Or actually they've been doing it, I think they started, in 2008. And it's worked just as advertised. Fuel use has gone steadily down, yet the province's jobs are up, GDP is up, and it's very popular with the population because that rebate check keeps everybody whole. And there's been a number of different organizations that have studied a carbon fee and dividend impact on the whole US economy, including a group called the GOP Climate Leadership Council, headed up by George Shultz, Jim Baker, and Hank Paulson from the Reagan administration. And here's what that research says. If we did a carbon fee and dividend versus continuing business as usual, we would have 2 million net more jobs than if we didn't do it. CO2 emissions would go down 50% in 20 years and continue lower thereafter. Increases household incomes with that rebate, saves American lives. Something like 13,000 Americans are lost every year just because of the particulate pollution from burning fossil fuels, primarily in power plants and automobiles. And not only could we save those lives, but no doubt tens of millions of dollars on healthcare costs. And our economy overall, 1.3 trillion more in GDP than if we didn't do it. So the GOP Leadership Council and the nonpartisan Citizens Climate Lobby that I'm a part of point out that there's no economic reason to not do this, and there's an awful lot of good reasons to do it. So these are 3 of my 5 grandkids, Lucy, Evan, June. And I envision them asking me, are you and the other grown-ups taking care of our little blue planet for us kids, Grandpa? And I'm trying to do my part. And I would like to invite you to think about your grandkids and kids asking you the same question. Our incredible Rotary legacy is amazing across the world, and it's really at risk. It's all at risk, even the reversal of our advances with polio, if climate change continues to get worse. We have the technology and the capabilities now to slow and then stop and hopefully even reverse it. And we just need to say, I'm in, and get to work. And now I'd like to take your questions, and during the questions, I will have this screen up so that if you'd like any of the items listed here, you can jot down my email address and shoot me an email and ask for them. And with that, I will take questions.
Okay, I've got some questions. One is from David Green, our banker here, one of our bankers, and he's asking you to discuss the potential impacts of CO2 from soil regeneration strategies.
That is a great question. Soil regeneration has tremendous potential. And I might mention that back in 2012, I went to a Nobel conference at Gustavus Adolphus College that kind of got me started on this. But about 2 years ago, the Nobel conference was on soils. And my wife said, no, wait, we're going to go sit on a hard chair for 2 days while they talk about dirt. And I said, yeah. And she brought a novel along just in case it wasn't very interesting, and never opened it, because for 2 days we were in rapt attentiveness as many speakers told us about lots of different aspects of the amazing soil that we depend on. But regenerative agriculture has the potential to not only quit releasing as much carbon as it does every time we plow it up, but to actually capture and sequester it, making the soil richer and enabling a farmer to actually make more money because he's had to use less fertilizer and less pesticides. So I'm not an expert on that, but I do know that the potential for sequestering carbon in the soil globally is a major opportunity for actually bringing down some of the CO2 that's already in the atmosphere. Great question.
Okay, thank you. So another question is, what are some of the reasons that the US is the highest producer of CO2? And another Rotarian partially answered that, saying that maybe transportation and coal-fired power production maybe are 2 of the major ones, but what else are your thoughts about the US's status there?
Well, one of the reasons that we are the top per capita producers is just because we have a really rich lifestyle. We have nice homes that we keep well heated in the winter and well air conditioned in the summer, which takes an enormous amount of energy. Because of our big country and our lack of high-speed trains, we drive everywhere and fly everywhere. We just burn a lot of energy per capita compared to people in other countries. Currently, though, across the country, we have made some strides. There have been closings of hundreds now, coal-fired power plants across the country, and more are going to be closing. And it's interesting that most of them have closed not because of environmental legislation, but because fracked natural gas has become so cheap that it was cheaper for utilities to convert coal-fired plants to gas. And that's kind of a partial transition and improvement because burning methane produces only half of the CO2 emissions as burning coal. But we unfortunately leak so much methane at all points along the process. And methane is a more powerful greenhouse gas than even CO2, that it may be a bit of a wash. So we eventually need to get moved away from natural gas also. Good question.
Within 45 minutes. All right, thank you.
And we'll give Marcia a chance to come back. One question that's sometimes asked is about nuclear power. And I'd have to say that before I really understood all about the climate crisis, I didn't have a very high opinion of nuclear energy. But since then, I have come to believe that we certainly need to keep all of the nuclear plants that are safely running, continued running, until we have mastered renewable energies to a far greater degree. And I am always reminded that France gets 80% of all of their electricity from nuclear power, and they've never had an accident. So I suspect that we could do better. And I know that there are technologies and universities working on much smaller and much safer nuclear generation plants. So.
Okay, thank you. One of our members is also an executive director of a local hospital foundation, and she raises the point that hospital emissions from surgical gases are increasing CO2, and they are also trying to change that without compromising patient safety and outcomes. So that is another area. But one question that Joe Crenshaw, our district governor, is asking is if you can speak to why rejoining the Paris Accord is good for the United States.
You know, we have, I think, maybe for 100 or 200 years, claimed to be one of the leaders in technology. And we've claimed to be the leader of the free world. And it's hard to lead when you're not even at the table. And so rejoining the Paris Accord puts us back at the table and back into at least the potential to regain and really give leadership on this issue. But the most important thing is that we're back at the table, and our voice, both in ideas and technology and realistic concerns, are all back at the table as the world works to address this challenge.
Okay, thank you. I am really pleased that Rotary International has decided to pursue climate change or our environment as one of our areas of focus. And I know that I think over the last 5 years or so that Rotary International has probably spent 15 to 18 million on helping those countries that really need help with climate change. And what Rotary is always looking out for are less fortunate, and a lot of our Rotary grant funds go to that. And now that to helping those countries, and I think that now that we have this as an area of focus, that does a couple of things. One is it helps to raise that as an issue, that Rotary is taking this as something very serious, as we did with, say, polio, eradicating polio. But also educating our members more about what we can be doing to assist this. But it also opens the door to, I think, to broader outreach for fundraising that we as Rotarians can participate in as well. So I'm glad that you have raised the point that there are things that we can do, and those are listed in your handout. But or people can, there's that Lucky Duck 49, email that if people have questions on how to do that. But through a Rotary Action Group, participating in that. We haven't discussed that much with our Rotarians. They may not know more about that or enough about that, but I can certainly help point them in the right direction. But then your own club starting a climate action group. So there are ways that we can get involved and to educate ourselves. And I think through both of those, we get some education individually as we are trying to reach out and help others. Would you say?
Yes, indeed. I
Okay.
might just mention quickly that our first project as a action team within our club was to work with the city of Northfield to install 2 electric vehicle charging stations. Because Northfield's kind of a small town and the only charging stations available were on the campuses and weren't really public. So now we have 2 very public charging stations in downtown with a nice Rotary logo on them.
Oh, excellent. That's great. Excellent. Excellent idea. Just one last point someone wanted to make was the cancellation of the economic agreement with China and a dozen other Asian nations resulted in that they were setting the rules and the United States has no voice or had no voice. And so if we want a voice heard, we have to join those partnerships that will help us, or those organizations that can help us, for example, in the Trans-Pacific area. So yeah, so Rotary is a good partner, and I think that is excellent. So thank you, Al, very much for your presentation. We have recorded this, of course, and we'll get that message out for those that have not attended our meeting. So all the way from Minnesota, we're glad that you participated with us. Thank you. And you're welcome to continue on the meeting if you wanted with us, but we're going to move on to some club business as well. So thank you. And thank you, John, for introducing us to your brother.
And I would just like to say thank you and to remind everybody of the tree that Marcia put up in the very beginning, that we shouldn't be waiting for someone else to solve the problem. We need to roll up our sleeves and tackle it.
Exactly. There it is. Yes, we've waited too long. I think even our ancestors have waited too long. So it's time for us to move forward and prepare actually pave the way for a better world, or at least protecting the world for our grandchildren as well. So thank you. Thank you, Al.